On February 15th, 2023, Brandy Crawford was struck at a Pasco County intersection by a company vehicle driver from Asphalt Paving Systems. So, what seemed like a routine crash led to permanent injuries and a legal battle over corporate responsibility. These injuries upended Brandy's life, and the case really centered on negligence, vicarious liability, and the impact of a moment's carelessness behind the wheel on the part of the company driver. And here to discuss this case is the lead plaintiff counsel, Morgan & Morgan's Dillon Brozyna, who, along with Grant Gillenwater and Bryce Spano, obtained a $6.1 million verdict. Dillon, it's great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. And just to correct you, it was 6.2.
6.2 that it is then. I wonder if you can walk us through what happened in the moment that Brandy was struck and what made it clear that this was something more than just a fender bender to you.
The crash itself is pretty straightforward. Brandy was stopped at a stoplight. There was construction going on. She had no idea that she was about to get rammed by a dump truck. So it was a heavy vehicle that crushed behind of her vehicle. So it was a serious impact. The physical property damage really confirmed that. You could see on the photographs of her car, the back window was shattered, the metal was bent in, crumpled in. So significant impact for someone who had never been involved in a car crash her whole life. The case itself, believe it or not, fell on a lot of issues. There was not just the causation of injuries, but also liability. The defendants, surprisingly, did not admit to being at fault for very much throughout the entire course of the litigation. It was only about a week before trial that the defendants finally admitted to liability. So they fought us all the way through. And of course, beyond that, we had to look at the issues of causation and the significance of her injuries, her damages. So those issues were fought out throughout the trial, but in the 2 years of litigation, the defendants didn't admit to fault. And so we had to obviously take that into consideration and prepare to be ready to argue liability and why she wasn't at fault for this crash. What seemed to be very simple was actually not.
Then was there any sort of meaningful offer from the defense or the insurer prior to filing suit? What factors do you believe led them to undervalue or dismiss Brandy's claim?
I can't exactly say what they were thinking. They obviously were not in the right in this scenario. But for the first 2 years that this case was litigated, there was no real offers on the table. And so a lot of times what we see in these types of cases is you have to have a trial secured to see real offers. And that's what happened, is once we secured a trial date, in the months leading up to trial, the defense changed their tune. And you started seeing the defense attorneys reaching out a lot more frequently, asking to see if we had room to negotiate. We had 2 mediations in the couple months leading up to the trial. So offers were made at that point. But at that point, it was too late, right? We had a trial date, and the numbers were too far apart at that point at the mediation, so they were unsuccessful. But yeah, to your point, in the first 2 years, there was no offer on the case.
What was Brandy's life like before the crash? I mean, in terms of family and work and health, how did the collision, which you've alleged caused permanent injuries, and I believe there was an aggravation of prior conditions, how did this all alter her day to day?
Brandy was living a pain-free life before this crash. She had never treated with an orthopedic doctor, never had complained in her life of low back pain, and all that changed on that day of the crash. She had significant permanent injuries to her low back that resulted in having to have multiple surgeries, having to take time off of work. So there was a strong component that she was going to lose her job. She, at the time of this crash, she had just started working at her dream job in the IT department for a very known grocery store, Publix. She was afraid that she was going to have to lose her job because she had to take a lot of time off of work. She wasn't able to go back to work right away. That was one of the key issues in this case, was showing the jury that Brandy was not going to give up. Even though that day really changed the course of her life, in that she now had these injuries that were going to bother her for the rest of her life, she did everything she could to get back to what her life was like before the crash. So sure enough, 3 months after the crash, she's back at work. She's having to take a lot of breaks. She's fighting through a lot of the hardships that were caused by this crash. And that was a very important theme to get across to the jurors.
So beyond the clear liability from the corporate driver's failure to stop, what were the legal or evidentiary turning points for you that could make or break this case? Basically, what sort of did it hinge on? What were the factors that it hinged on?
A lot of these cases hinge on whether the injury is permanent, whether the surgeries and all the treatment was related to the actual events in the crash. And so, of course, it comes down to about all the experts. The defendants are going to hire their own defense experts to come up with opinions stating that at some point all the treatment and all the pain is no longer related to the events that happened on the day of the crash. The jury saw through that, right? And the reason they saw through that is they used their common sense. Here was a young woman who was 23 years old, who had never once complained of back pain, never complained of knee pain. And there's an event that happens, a big crash, and the treatment that ensues afterwards clearly was causally related. Now, the defense, the doctors, took the position that at some point, I believe it was 60 days after the crash, everything forward was not related to the crash. So that was the major issue in the case, was getting the jury to understand that these injuries were caused by the crash, but she was going to have long-term effects for the rest of her life, and the procedures and everything that she had to go through was related to that crash.
Was there any other particular obstacle or issue, I don't know, such as a defense challenge to medical causation or a prior injury, or, I don't know, something from the defense side that forced you to either pivot or to double down?
These types of cases, when you're dealing with the spine, it's an invisible injury. You can't see the injury itself, right? So the defense is always going to attack the credibility of your clients, in this case, Brandy, in so much that they were indirectly suggesting that she was exaggerating, that she wasn't that hurt, that she had all these procedures for the lawsuit. And so credibility is an important aspect in any trial, especially when you're dealing with an invisible injury that you can't physically see. Brandy sat all week in trial with us, and she's just like any other person. She's sitting there. You can't see her in pain because those injuries are within, right? And so the jury gets to hear both sides. Fortunately, the plaintiff gets to go first, right? And so we're able to put a lot of these things that we believe the defense is going to bring up into context. That was a major thing, is in making sure that our client, when Brandy took the stand, that she didn't overreach, she didn't exaggerate, she kept her credibility. So that was an important thing throughout the case.
Let's talk about Pasco County. What traits or beliefs were you looking for in potential jurors, especially in the case involving a corporate defendant and a plaintiff, alleging these long-term injuries, and what I suppose to most people would look like a routine crash?
This crash was not routine in the sense that, the car was not drivable. It was a hard impact. And so what we look for jurors, we want to find jurors that have empathy, that can relate to your client. So in jury selection, you ask a lot of series of questions, and you try to find the right 6 jurors that can relate and that have compassion and can see through a lot of the falsehoods that the defense tries to establish throughout the trial.
I'm curious how you prepared for the arguments that opposing counsel might bring.
That's our job as attorneys, is to sort of see some of the bruises or the potential arguments that the defense may bring up. And at the end of the day, the defense usually has similar arguments that they try to make, that the client was not being truthful, was exaggerating. In this particular case, the defense had one theme that they wanted to get across, in that our client was using medical marijuana, that she had been using medical marijuana prior to the crash, and wanted to portray the image of someone who's just a deadbeat of sorts, right? Just didn't have much going on, and that this lawsuit was the end all for her. And so it was important for us to put that into context, to get ahead of it, and to explain to the jurors why she had a prescription, which is legal in the state of Florida, for medical marijuana. And so an important thing that we did on direct examination with Brandy was going through that period when she decided to go to a doctor to get a prescription for medical marijuana. And what we found out was, in the months before that, she had lost her father. And the defense was not aware of that. And it was a tragic story. She lost her father suddenly, and she had nightmares afterwards and was dealing with some depression and anxiety. And so she ended up having a medical marijuana license. And so we were able to put that into context and make the defense to look bad, right? Because they were just cherry picking one fact, but not giving the jury context as to why she had done that.
Interesting. What was the overarching theme that you wanted to drive home for the jury in closing? And how did you and your team prepare for that testimony?
The overarching theme was that Brandy Crawford is a fighter. She's not a quitter. She's going to go on with her life. She's going to make the most of her life, even though she has these challenges. And I think that was very important for the jury to see that she was going to continue to work. She was going to continue taking care of her family. She had a young family. And so instilling that from the very beginning of the case by introducing who she was and having her explain that to the jury. I was always taught as a lawyer, jurors are not going to root for someone who's given up. They're going to root for someone who's not given up, who's doing everything they can to get back on their feet. And Brandy symbolized that at trial.
Whether in terms of like litigation strategy or communication with your client or your understanding of how juries process these types of injuries, what lessons did you think that you took away from this case? What will you carry forward after representing Brandy?
Sure. I think it was really important for us at the beginning of the case and opening statement to get ahead. Jurors tend to make up their mind very early on, and it's hard to change their mind throughout the case. So we had to take a lot of time and prepare for that opening statement and ensure that we got all the facts out and also predict what the defense was going to argue and say and get in front of it. Be the first ones to sort of get that message out to the jurors as to why that may not be the right conclusion.
Dillon, a big thank you for joining us and walking us through this case and what was really fascinating. Thank you.